Hare Krishna and welcome back, dear devotees. We trust you found session 1 to be informative and insightful. The second session, the preaching paradigm, discrimination and preaching, will be facilitated by Bhaktin Bontle. Bhaktin Bontle serves in various capacities within ISKCON and is a member in the South African National Council. In this session, panelists will explore if outreach methods represent the racial, cultural, and linguistic demographics within the ISKCON community in Africa. Welcome, Bhaktin Bontle.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu, and thank you very much. And Hare Krishna, dear devotees, thank you and welcome back from the break. Welcome to session 2 of this year's BBT Africa Conference. Dumelang Lotle, my name is Bontle, as has been mentioned, and for the next hour or so, I'll be facilitating a conversation around the preaching paradigm, which will include a discussion of discrimination and outreach in Africa. The hope with this session is that we can celebrate our successes, share and learn from one another, and share openly, honestly, and lovingly about preaching on this continent, our continent. This topic may have thorny or sensitive components, but the beauty of it is that we're here to chat together, to think together, and to be inspired on how we can collectively participate in the mission of Lord Chaitanya and Srila Prabhupada in Africa. I will be joined by 4 panelists for this discussion, whom I will now warmly introduce. This session 2 conversation will be joined by His Grace Haridev Das from Mauritius. Welcome, Prabhu. Hare Krishna.
So, my name is Haridev Das. I'm currently serving as the zonal supervisor in Mauritius. And you also asked to give a little brief about how preaching is going on in Mauritius. Where in the pre-COVID days, I would say that in terms of outreach, we had like a Harinam every day in the week somewhere around the island. And Mauritian devotees are very much into house programs. And especially now during Kartik, there is lots of house programs going on every day. So we look forward to discussion on the topic. Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much and welcome. I would like to welcome next His Grace Srivastas Prabhu from West Africa. Welcome, Prabhu. Just a note, dear devotees, that we have been notified that there might be some audio delays on Srivas Prabhu's side. So kindly, we can all just kindly be patient as Srivas Prabhu does share with us this afternoon. Srivas Prabhu, can you hear us? No worries at all. Maybe what I'll do is Hare Krishna, Prabhu, we can hear you. Yes, please continue. Welcome. What I will do, Srivas Prabhu, if that's okay, I will invite the rest of our panelists, and I will come back to you. I will circle back to your Grace for your introduction, if that's all right with you. Well, next, kindly like to welcome His Grace Umapati Das, Prabhu from East Africa. Welcome, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Hare
Please
Krishna.
accept my humble obeisance. So my name is Umapati Das. I am serving as a zonal supervisor in East Africa. So due to COVID here, there was no Harinam because government did not allow, and even house programs. But recently we started college preaching, not at Harinam. So something little bit we are doing.
Thank you, Prabhu, and welcome. Thank you for sharing. I'd like to welcome next Her Grace Navina Radhika Dasi Prabhu from South Africa. Welcome, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna, please accept my humble obeisances. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. So, yes, I'm Navina Radhika Dasi, and I'm based in Cape Town. I am a full-time employee. So, my experience of preaching has been the wonderful online programs that ISKCON Cape Town has maintained throughout COVID. I know that now that the restrictions are a little bit lowered, we had a wonderful Govardhan Puja program yesterday. The temple was quite full. There are many preaching initiatives, many senior devotees who are taking up Bhakti Vriksha classes in their regions and just teaching Bhagavad Gita or Krishna consciousness in different parts of the province.
Thank you. That's very enlivening to hear. And happy Govardhan Puja to everyone for yesterday. Thank you, Navina Radhika Prabhu. I'd like to circle back to Srivas Prabhu. Is the audio sorted? Can you hear us? And maybe we can try to hear if we can hear you. Srivas Prabhu, are you maybe muted? Maybe you can unmute and try share. All right, maybe we will continue, and hopefully, Srivas Prabhu, we can get to hear from you and you'll be able to engage on our topics or the various topics that we have this afternoon. It would really be a pity if we don't get to hear from you, but we're praying that all the technical gremlins and challenges will be sorted out and we can all then participate in the session that we have this afternoon. So welcome once more and thank you very much. The format for our conversation this afternoon will be as follows. There will be a presentation, a set of presentation slides, which are meant to inspire or provoke some thinking on various topics. And maybe they can be presented now just so we can see what the overview of the conversation that we hope to engage in will be for as long as we have. So I see they coming up. So session 2 is the preaching paradigm, discrimination and outreach in Africa. So on the next slide, I'll just wait for the next slide to pop up. But when it does, you will see that there's various topics, 6 of them, that we will engage with, high level, deep level. We'll see how the time flows. And these are the different aspects that we'll touch on. We'll talk about the preaching paradigm itself. What is it? We'll speak about aspects of language. I'll share an overview in terms of a study that the World Economic Forum did 2 years ago. It might be a bit outdated now because things happen so fast in this digital age, but I'll share what the landscape looked like 2 years ago in terms, and we can then discuss who are we then preaching to. We will touch on spirituality on the continent, since we do know Africa is a spiritually rich, diverse continent and area, and we'll just engage in terms of how do we as ISKCON engage with that already rich diversity in terms of spirituality. We'll talk on culture, touch on that, and then also think about how we as ISKCON and in our preaching endeavors, how does that align and how does that support or how does that meet with the continent, the priorities that we have on this continent. So on the next slide, we'll get us kicked off. In terms of Srila Prabhupada built a house that everyone can build in. Can live in. He built a house that everyone can live in. However, we do know that there have been experiences broadly, even personally, even localized, or maybe the systemic aspects in terms of discrimination that is faced. How does that show up in how we are as a community, but also how does that seep out in terms of how we engage and interface with the communities around us? So on the next slide, I have some questions and you'll see them when they pop up. And recently there has been a discussion around how we phrase and how we use and engage the term preaching, with some suggestions that maybe we balance it out, because preaching also has got connotations and can be a heavily loaded term, not in our environments, not in our context, but in other spaces as well. And there's been an introduction of the term outreach. So on the slide, I've tried to distinguish between the two in terms of outreach has been said to be more listening, we're sharing as a community, we're also vulnerable with the communities that we interface with. How do we engage with humility and learning? Yet at the bottom, you see, I think you can read it bigger than I can, but how do we balance the two? So I'll pause now and hear from the devotees on the call in terms of your responses. What is in a name, outreach versus preaching? So I will invite, maybe in the order that we shared, Haridev, Prabhu, any insights or thoughts that you have around outreach and preaching? What is in a name? How do we balance the two if need be?
Well, it's a nice thought, difference between outreach and preaching. Preaching has more of a connotation of, getting something across in maybe like a forceful way, imposing on someone and preaching to you. So you sit down and listen to me. But outreach is more like, we are opening up and inviting people to learn about us, what we do. And if they're interested, then we share more and invite them maybe to join us and see for themselves. And if they're interested, they can participate. That's like on top of the mind.
Thank you, Haridev, Prabhu. Maybe I'll move to Umapati, Prabhu. Leading from that, how well, just reflecting, as a moment of reflection, as a community, as a preaching community, we are evangelistic, we are on a mission. How do we balance what Haridev Prabhu has mentioned now?
So, in East Africa, little bit different from Mauritius.
Okay,
So,
please share.
So their process will be different also. Even in East Africa, especially in Nairobi, Prabhupada came 3 times. He gave instruction to Brahmanand, so to do Harinam regularly and do book distribution, more or less free for local people, local Africans, and prasad distribution, food for life program. So we do these 3 things. We do about 1,000, 2,000, especially during COVID times, we are distributing every day 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 people prasadam. And every day we are coming in media, every day, KT and other, and also we have this ISKCON Hktc, Hare Krishna Training Center. So every present time 60 to 70, we have about 100 students facility. So present time 60 students from university, all are the local. His name is Govinda Prem Prabhu, who is a local preaching director in East Africa. He is a leader. Recently, I think 3 weeks back, we started Vaishnavi program. So same HKTC, Hare Krishna Training Center for girls, those who comes from university. So present time about 5 girls there, even 2 weeks. So we do, and also almost we do free book distribution. About every year, maybe $80,000 free distribution, book distribution. All 99% to local people. And we collect donations from Indians, and we do Harinam. In this way, we are trying little bit. So we have also opened other center in completely local area. If you have, maybe you have not been in Nairobi, other DOT, Srivas Prabhu and Govardhan Prabhu, other, they have been here. So from Nairobi to about 30 kilometers far, it's called Juja. We open one center. Or in near the university, we have the flat It's about 10 students stay there, present time, maybe 6 months back we opened. And we are planning here from Nairobi to 200 kilometers is one place called Nakaru. Prabhupada went there to preach. So Her Grace Mansi Ganga Mataji, she is about 77 years old lady, Vaishnavi. She's opening a center for local devotees there. So we are trying little bit here in East Africa.
It
Especially
doesn't sound. Yes,
Kenya.
Prabhu? I was mentioning that it doesn't sound like a little bit at all. It really sounds like you're doing great strides in terms of the preaching, and all glories to the devotees who are there. Thank you so much for sharing. Navina Radhika Prabhu, what is your experience? I like how Umapati Prabhu mentioned that contextual differences may be there. What is your experience from the Southern African space?
I think it's a wonderful evolution in terms of mindset to consider if the fit of the word preaching is appropriate for the day and age. I think in context with South Africa, at least, for the preacher or for the devotees who we want to inspire to be Lord Chaitanya's foot soldiers and to go and share Krishna consciousness, being part of a preaching drive and a mission can be very encouraging and inspiring. It's not easy to take up the mission and approach strangers and distribute books. We talk about the numbers of books, 2, 3, 30. But just to have that engagement with one person takes so much effort. So I like the word preaching for the preachers because it has the mission aspect, which is such a rich culture within Krishna consciousness and from Prabhupada's teachings. But for the receiver of the preaching initiative, the non-devotee, outreach is so appropriate. Both, I would say, I think the term will evolve even more. Personally, I think that preaching and outreach places devotees in one place and the recipients of Krishna consciousness in another. And I think that it's so important for us to start identifying ourselves as part of localized communities as ISKCON and seeing how we can become so accessible, so visible, so attractive, that there are many that are feel very welcome and invited to come and seek Krishna consciousness. So I think outreach will be received better, and I think it's headed in the right direction. But it would be wonderful to have localized outreach, localized accessibility as the future focused evolution.
Thank you so much for those insights. And as I was listening to you share, it almost made me think about, because as you were describing it, it's beautiful because their words serve for the different communities, but it can also dichotomize, which is in a sense, or the sense that actually ours receiving. Now, I was thinking about transparency. What does that transparency look like? And touching on topics of language, and maybe you can share in terms of transparency and your response or remark to what I'm sharing. Can we have the slides on language come up, since this is something that we are moving into? So just as a fun fact, I learned as I was putting this together that it's this quote is usually attributed to Nelson Mandela. He said that if you talk to a man in a language he understands, that goes to his head. If you talk to him in his language, that goes to his heart. And the fun fact I wanted to mention is he actually did not say these words, but what he actually said implied this message, which is being presented here. So around the local context, and maybe I will cycle back to you, Navina Radhika Prabhu, context, you spoke about us being relevant and being situated in the spaces that we're in. How do we engage with them if we cannot, speak in the messages or in the language or the mediums of their hearts? So I'll go through the different points, and devotees, I will then open it up for you to pick up on any of these. So around language proficiency, as a community, ISKCON community, how well can we connect with the hearts of others through their local languages? There's also an aspect of power differentials. The language that you speak offers you certain access. So in what ways are we actually negotiating and navigating the access that language provides? There's also a mindfulness of honoring language heritage, because there's so much knowledge that is stored in words. I mean, we know that from our own literature as well. When you break down the etymology of a word, there's so much richness in there. And in the cultures and the context that we live in, we have, because I'm part of the context, we have languages, and there's so much beauty and knowledge and depth in those languages. How do we preserve that language heritage and honor it? And finally, maybe as you're thinking through these points, what does it mean for us, especially in the previous session, we're talking about books and the printing of those and innovative ways of spreading our literature. How does language fit in? Because I may be able to speak the language, but writing it, I might not be so proficient. So what does that mean for us in terms of printing and dissemination of books? So I'm cycling back to Your Grace, Navina Radhika Prabhu, and share your thoughts on these.
So true, what Nelson Mandela said. I've lived in all parts of South Africa, lived and worked. And I think the most sensitive region as far as language goes is Cape Town, is the Cape, the Northern Cape, Western Cape. And what I've learned working in local government is that there's a rule in these parts that whatever we write or publish gets translated into 3 languages: English, Afrikaans, and ISKCON. And initially I thought it was just a matter of, being politically correct. But having traveled to local communities, you actually find that there are many, many people still who their first language is not English. What to speak of now trying to add Sanskrit explained through English to a non-English speaker. So the work of the BBT in translating books into African languages is critical, because there's simply a band, and sadly goes according to economic groupings because of the availability of level of education, that simply won't be able to access the knowledge if they don't understand what is being said. But in terms of the general public, I think that, we look at language we have a very single-minded view of what accomplishing or going past the language barrier means. It means having books in many, many languages. No, I think many Africans read English. If you look at social media, I don't know who's focusing on translating social media into many, many African languages, and yet everybody seems to understand what's going on if it's on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. So I wonder how much really of a barrier that is. But what I think the opportunity is like we started speaking about localized preaching, to be able to receive the knowledge and have a reference book where I can go back and read about it. But the class is being given in my home language. I think that would be, very attractive. You see churches coming up all over the Western Cape, and depending on where they land, they'll advertise and have a preacher who is speaking Afrikaans. The Bible is the Bible, or the whatever religious group they're part of. But the communication tool when it comes to discussion is in that language that someone can understand and relate and take home. So there's definitely a place for it. I just think we need to look into it a little bit more holistically, and not just about the print medium. Let's start to engage and understand what local dynamics are.
Thank you. Very insightful, so pertinent. And in my introduction, I mentioned about inspiring how we can move forward. I'm hoping through the course of this conversation, or even afterwards, that we can land on concrete steps that we can take. So this does not end up philosophizing and just words, but not actually translating into the impact that we can actually have collectively with the communities we're in. Thank you for those thoughts. Umapati Prabhu. So Navina Radhika Prabhu mentioned relevance. She mentioned communicating to the context and how language can also be a medium not only through the translation and the books that we engage with, but also being with others. And you have mentioned that you've got the training centers. What does the language dynamic look like in East Africa, particularly around the training centers, maybe specifically, and you can also broaden it if you like.
So I have 32 years experience in Kenya, East Africa. So language is most important. Whatever Mataji told is correct. But our experience is here, we have translated Bhagavad Gita in Swahili. But when we distribute on the road, so 99% people, they prefer English. Maybe you go in rural area, so might they will need Swahili Bhagavad Gita or Swahili books. But my humble request, this is BBT should translate all the languages, not in the world. That is wonderful. But here I have experience with this Dwarika Basni Mataji. She is Indian body devotee. We have so many local body devotees. She the most dynamic to distribute books. 101% she distributes to local people. And other local devotee goes distribute, they distribute maybe 20 books. She distributes 100, 200 books. So according to my understanding, everything is good. If some local person is strong leader, wonderful. If somebody is speaking local language, is wonderful. At the end, need sincerity and seriousness. But in our Hare Krishna Tennis Center, most of the people coming from university, they don't like youngsters. They don't like to speak here Kiswahili language. Even if we speak Kiswahili, they reply in English. We have experience. So they are educated people, so we don't have such a problem of language here. Here in Nairobi, I go, even Kisumu, I travel. Even those who are parking boy, they speak English. So English people, even here, I feel just like you have, preaching means depends on your behavior. When they see people coming from England, from America, they're automatically attracted to them. They come, they attend their Harinam, they release, they dance with them. So they become very favorable. But although language is most important, if somebody speaks my mother language, I feel very happy. But at the end, behavior is very important. They feel I am giving something to them. Then they will become yours. We have a school also here. ISKCON is a school in rural area, about 120 kilometers far, since 10 years. So for local poor, especially poor people. So they welcome us. So they don't need much. Not here in East Africa, people are very simple. Here, especially Kenyan people, Ugandan people, very Tanzanian, they are very simple, not very complicated. I have not seen since so many years any such problem, some riots, some anything wrong. So it's suitable, please come, please here. I want to invite everybody.
Right.
We'll pay ticket also.
There's an open invitation to everyone. At the end, we'll have a ticker with Umapati Prabhu's contact details. There's an open ticket for us to visit East Africa and be engaged and involved in the preaching activities there. I had some follow-up questions in terms of what you shared, Umapati Prabhu, but I'll pause to allow Haridev Prabhu to also come into this conversation. We've spoken about language diversity. Umapati Prabhu has mentioned how that translates in their area. I think there's been a lot that has been covered. And so to not lead you, maybe you can share, where are you sitting? What are your reflections as you're listening to what has been shared thus far?
Well, over here, I would say in Mauritius, it's a little bit different than from the actual African continent in terms of diversity of language. So the literacy rate in Mauritius is like over 90%. So even when devotees come from abroad and give lectures in English, that's pretty much understood. And in terms of book distribution, also the majority of the books we distribute are in English. That doesn't cause much of a problem, but there definitely needs. There is a need for books in French also, And recently, the BBT published one Creole book, a small book, and currently there is one devotee who is translating Bhagavad Gita in Creole language, the local dialect spoken in over here in Mauritius. That's due to be printed next year, I understand now. So I would say that, you know, the actual demand for books maybe in Creole, and just for that matter, Creole is a dialect, and it's only been like, you know, a couple of years maybe that we started to actually use Creole or teach Creole in the schools. So it is not pretty much something that's widely read. So for us, I would say, in terms of books, we are okay. In terms of the languages that we receive, we do get some Hindi books also from the BBT in from Africa. From India. And what would really be of interest, maybe in terms of language, would be like audiobooks in the local language for those who have difficulty reading. So that would be of interest. And also, just to share with you quickly what other movements do, like, you know, the Christians, they distribute Bible in Creole, and that's given, like, you know, free of cost. And we actually at times, you know, get requests from devotees also, you know, we should do the same and distribute books, get books in Creole. So for them, I would say, like, you know, the Bhagavad Gita is coming in Creole next year, and surely maybe that will try to bridge the gap in terms of the offerings in local Creole language.
Thank you, Haridev, Prabhu. And on bridging the gaps, we have limited time this afternoon. I'm going to try and move to what actually is the gap. And I'll share a series of slides and then land on the next entry points, which I think will be the last one before we move into the Q&A. So could we please have the set of slides again, please? So right now we're talking about the linguistic diversity, and thank you, Haridev Prabhu, because that's what you've mentioned now in terms of understanding what's actually happening in the spaces that we're in. I wanted to highlight, there's this one view where it said that generally these are the languages that are spoken in each of the areas, and also that could be related to the colonial past that our continent has, and the beauty that has been mentioned in terms of some of your responses, just understanding and responding and reflecting the diversity linguistically that we have. As we move on to the next slide, I'll just wait for it to come on. Who are we preaching to? So I'll share a set of slides with you, but essentially what I would like us to chat about before we open up to Q&A is who are we preaching to, and how does that, and what is the gap? Because that's the phrase you mentioned now, what is the gap between, what is the gap? I'll just leave it there. So this was, I mentioned the World Economic Forum study that was done 2 years ago. And this is what the African demographic looks like in terms of religious affiliation. You'll see at the top there that the different colors represent different things, different categories. And you can see that there's mainly blues and mainly greens on the space and a bit of yellow. So green is Muslim, blue is Christian, and the yellow that we see is other. And within that other category is Buddhist, it's Baha'i, and various other faiths in that category. Moving to the next slide. They also tracked demographics in that area who are unaffiliated religious-wise. So you can see in the first column, it's 2010, which was many years back, 11 years ago, and they did a projection in terms of what will that look like in the future. So I have highlighted sub-Saharan Africa, that about 10 years back, we were about 2.3, and we one of the few areas where there might be an increase of a religiously unaffiliated population in the next 30 years or so. Moving forward. So spirituality on the continent, I had mentioned that already this continent is spiritually rich. And in terms of our preaching as ISKCON, how are we positioned in terms of the diversity that is present on the continent? Can you move on, please? And this is where I will serve as a departure point. So we can see from the different monuments that are on the the continent, different artifacts that we have engaged with. And maybe as a parting shot, I'll highlight and different individuals, personalities on the continent as well, who have been preachers and been sharing spiritually to uplift the population on the continent and just in the world generally. And the parting shot is religions were not needed in Africa. Africa had something higher than religion. It has a divine spirituality. And I couldn't edit out that spelling error. But how do we respond to what I mentioned in terms of this is what the religious affiliation landscape looks like? We're seeing that there'll be a growth in terms of religiously unaffiliated individuals, yet we are situated within a spiritually rich context. How do we respond to this? What is the gap actually that we're interfacing with? Maybe I'll start with Your Grace Umapati Prabhu, because you've been in the middle thus far, and then I'll cycle back.
Hare Krishna
What
Mataji.
is the gap? Yes, what is the gap, Umapati Prabhu? Please share.
There is definitely there is a gap, but where in our area, especially we are located about 5 kilometers from city center. Just I am sharing practical. Before was gap here, our temple was when Brahmananda Prabhu he purchased land. There was about 95% people were Indian. Now, since that time, since I am seeing 30 years, now about 40% Indian in this area, 60% came local people. So in this way, so now we are getting. That's why we are open the Hare Krishna Training Center for girls, for boys, because this our area gradually becoming more people coming from local area, our environment, and the India are moving different way, area. Gap is there because there is gap in culture, in language, little bit in behavior also. But when we say we have to preach everybody, Prabhupada told we have to preach local people. More we should give attention to here local because we are in Africa, in Kenya. So we are getting now since 5-7 years more and more chance to preach, approach local people to preach local people. Especially our about 70% program, only life membership program, only even cultivation for donation only for Indians. Mostly we are preaching local peoples. Our book distribution to local people, college is local students, and Harinam also for local people, Prasadam. So we don't have such a problem of gap. Even if you come here, anybody can come anytime, enter the temple, take Prasadam, Rajbhog Prasadam. Either local, either Indian, either guest like from Europe, America. We don't have such a problem, such a discrimination here. So in this way, we don't have much problem. So for our place, there is number, but outside there must be gap. So many things problem is there. I am talking whatever I am seeing.
Right, right.
But here is, just like if you go out, if you come here, if you put sari and tilak, even local, on the road, so many people tell you Hare Krishna.
Okay.
So many, and the airport, even our DOT goes, security people, they don't check. They don't check.
Yeah.
So we have little bit here, little bit, our PR is a little bit better, and other things there, they are not much a problem. So, but it must be problem there. There is not discrimination.
Right.
There is not a gap. Unless
Right.
people come on a spiritual platform, that time gap will be reduced. Even in the temple, you can see gap. Everywhere is some problem.
I hear
But
you.
but still, this is a spiritual society created by society means maybe so many type of people, not one type.
Right, right. Thank you,
So
Umapati.
we don't feel like this, and
Hmm.
nobody, even somebody treats us, I don't feel because it is natural.
I'm with
Natural.
you.
Those who know
Thank
they say
you.
Hare Krishna. Those who do not know, they are preaching Hinduism. But they know, oh, Hare Krishna is different. So we know very well. So we don't have such a problem anyway. Somebody welcome, somebody they don't welcome.
Yeah, thank you, Umapati Prabhu, for that perspective. Haridev Prabhu, I'll come to
Okay.
you. I have a question around what Umapati Prabhu has now mentioned in terms of being recognized within the communities that we're in. Can you share a little bit with us? What does that look like from the Mauritius side? It kind of reminds, I think some years back, I'm not too sure what the sentiment is now. I read an article that mentioned how in the when Hare Krishna was starting in the 60s, 70s, everyone knew of the Hare Krishnas. They were seen everywhere. And the title of the article was Where are the Hare Krishnas Now? Something to that effect. And with that type of thinking, I'm just reflecting also on what is, because it makes me think of what is then preaching. Who are we preaching to? And do we what does it mean when we are recognized? What does it mean when we're not recognized? And what does preaching mean? Who are we preaching to in terms of how our local communities recognize us, associate with us, or even partner up with us? Maybe you can share your thoughts on that.
Yes, certainly, Maraji. I would say that in Mauritius, the perception that people have of the International Society for Krishna Consciousness has changed over the years. Initially, during the early times, I remember I was still a little kid. The Hare Krishnas were viewed as CIA people from the US, and we had bad publicity in the press. And over the years, with extensive preaching that has been going on ever since Srila Prabhupada and the devotees came in 1975, there has been gradual acceptance of ISKCON. Initially, even the local Hindu community, they were not very much appreciative of the preaching that we were doing. But things have improved generally over the years, and now if we consider even for Janmashtami, even if we don't do any invitation for Janmashtami, you'll get at least 5,000-10,000 people who will come to each of the temples, and this is basically what we saw even when we just came out of lockdown this year.
I have a question on that point. May I ask?
Yes, Maraji.
Who are the visitors, the 5,000, the number that you're mentioning? Who is
Yes,
coming?
coming to that, it's mostly the local Hindu community, mostly. For that matter, it's I mean, it's important to point out also that in Mauritius we don't have typical local population. Everyone came from everywhere from the world, from Africa, India, China, Europe. So we got a variety of cultures here, and about 55% of the population is originally from India, of Hindu origin. So most of the preaching is in fact directed to the Hindu community. We don't have systematic or structured preaching or outreach targeted at other people. But when devotees go out and book distribution or doing Harinam, Rath Yatras, prasadam is distributed to everyone, and books are distributed to everyone. We also participate in interfaith programs. So these things are going on. So basically, that's the scene. And from the outside, the perception is actually that ISKCON is like a Hindu organization. So we got to work on creating this the actual brand of ISKCON. There's work to be done there.
Got you. Thank you.
Yeah.
And we're being reminded by I don't think it's called a ticker, but as reflected on the screen, please, after this, we will be opening up for Q&A. So any questions or comments that you have, please do share them via Facebook, via YouTube, the streams that you are joining from. But you're also welcome to email them at the email address that has been indicated. Thank you, Haridev, Prabhu. And with that, because we will then be closing up this discussion and opening it up to the rest of our audience members, Navina Radhika Prabhu, Haridev Prabhu, as he was mentioning now, or as he was speaking, one of the things I was reminded of is in the first session, a word that came up around conversion. So maybe you can speak to that idea, and also what Haridev Prabhu was also mentioning in terms of the space, the context that they find themselves in Mauritius, the context and how the preaching is then being informed by that. But also he ended off with the idea of branding, and I guess it's a question of positioning as well in the communities that we're in. So from a Southern African space, please share with us around conversion, branding, and I forgot now what the middle point was, but you can start your thoughts.
You know, we have a wonderful example in Srila Prabhupada. He came from the East. He came from India. He had so much available. He packaged it very nicely into ISKCON, and he understood his audience. And that is why when he arrived, you know, in the US and he started to preach, he was so innovative. He was so intelligent about how he would present this philosophy to, you know, people who are not the most academic, who are not, you know, who are very much part of society in a I guess uncultured way in many ways. But in South Africa, I think that we need a revival. We need to rethink how we present ourselves, because we have a unique history. When I think about conversion and preaching, you know, it puts my stomach in a knot, because we come from a lineage where we experienced discrimination through apartheid. And in terms of spirituality, you know, when you break down the family structure and you remove, you know, men in the family and you take them, place them elsewhere to go and work, you understand the psychology of how people work, and you intentionally break down the fiber of how they identify with God, with their family traditions. It really affects how receptive they are now to preaching initiatives. So we talk about apartheid like it was far back in the past. In my own family, you know, we're talking about my father, who was born in 1945, who this is his experience of life. And he has a daughter who comes from him, so understands the history, but had more freedom than he did to explore spirituality. So if you look at our generation of ISKCONites, we choose Krishna consciousness. The product and the brand worked. You know, we were able to receive, but there's so many concerns and issues and sensitivities about retaining devotees like us, because there is a lack of sense of belonging. Once we enter this community, it still feels like very much an Indian-dominated community, which disturbs the ability of the individual to just receive Krishna consciousness. Looking at the next generation, you know, the millennials, and this is a whole other brand altogether. They, I think, are more conscious than ever, than any of us. You know, we're living in the age of LGBTQI+, you know, where the consciousness is, we are open to everything. We're accepting of everything. We're non-judgmental of anything. I mean, what better preaching ground is there? And yet Krishna consciousness is not the first choice when it comes to making a selection of diet. You know, such growing trends of veganism and vegetarianism, I don't see ISKCON playing a role in that. there's growing trends in people needing to look inward and meditate and escape corporatism and go back into kind of simple living. But our brand, which has everything to offer, is not the first choice. So I think we really need to internalize and reflect and see how it is that we are putting forward this great gift of Krishna consciousness, and be open to evolving, because I think the more the further time ticks on, the further away we are connected to the general public. And there are many ways to do that. I think it really starts with seeing that we are a part of the community, not just that we are, we have some superiority and we want to give them something. No, actually we are part of, and whatever the attraction is, we would like to share more of what we know, and we're respectful of everyone else's traditions and their starting point. We don't have much time, so I have to leave it at that.
Thank you. Thank you. Like what you were mentioning now, especially the latter part, in the work that I do, I'm looking at ways essentially of that in terms of how do we engage, how do we relate, how do we coexist. Sounds like such a stiff term, but that in essence is what it is. Like how do we, the interrelationships essentially, that's what it's about. And that latter point, like from that body of knowledge, the idea is reciprocity, because that is what I was thinking of, is you're talking about a superior position of I've got a lot to give, but how much do I also have to receive? So this idea of reciprocity, is what popped into my head as you're mentioning that. And you mentioned that there's lots of ways we can do this. Hopefully there's time to have parting shots from each of our panelists, and we would love, I'm speaking on behalf of the community, we'd love to hear what are those ways, because as I've mentioned, this should not just be a conversation, but how do we practically move forward? So now Q&A, we're opening it up, and this is the first question that we have received. The comment is, publishing books is more important than constructing temples. That's a quote by Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur. And the comment from the audience member here is, there's great infrastructure in terms of temples where there's a largely predominant Indian culture with less outreach as compared to countries with less infrastructure but successful outreach. I need to pause and listen and take this in again. And this one is from Jabu. So thank you, Jabu, for sharing that. There's great infrastructure in terms of temples where there's a largely predominant Indian culture with less outreach. Okay, with less infrastructure but successful outreach. So we've heard from our different panelists today in terms of the different outreach activities that are taking place and the infrastructure that's supposed to support that. I'll open it up. Do any of the panelists have something to say in response to Jabu? I will then maybe, yes, please, thank you.
I agree completely. How do we move away from our model of we go out to distribute books on the street and the taker, the reader, in order to find out more, has to come to us, where we have our flagship centers and temples outside of their environment. When I think of the city of Cape Town, we have hundreds of community centers. The first thing that someone who wants to start a religious program does is they don't have, money often to put up the infrastructure to build a temple, a church. They go to the centers and they start their programs, and they gain popularity within the community and congregation. And then it becomes a congregational drive to establish a structure. And I'm sure they have flagship temples and infrastructure elsewhere, but the mentality is, we will come to you. We will be accessible to you. And the more that you want, we will provide. So I agree completely that, it remains that way because we don't develop from the grassroots up. We are still coming with something and bringing it to, or inviting you to come to it. So when we give, it feels very much like something foreign, something Indian that is coming to us. But if you presented it in our homes, in our back door, it is something that I might be curious about and be more receptive to, because it's not far-fetched. And when you exist in a community, you get to understand how local people operate. So if I'm making rice, dal, and sabji, and this is a community that survives on, mini meal, pap, and green vegetables, you adjust. You learn so much that helps you to adapt your preaching appropriately. And I think that opportunity is lost if we remain just about, temples in the way that we have established them before.
Thank you for that. Umapati Prabhu, I will invite you because you've mentioned and with what you're sharing that it sounds that you have penetrated the spaces that you're in. You mentioned the schools, you've mentioned the training centers. Can you maybe share your remarks in terms of what Navina Radhika Prabhu has shared now?
I agreed with Mataji.
Sorry, Prabhu, can I rephrase my question in terms of the successes? Because this is also, as I said, sharing and learning. So what has made you successful in that we can also learn from?
First thing, our mission should be, I feel local people should be GBC, should be so many gurus. That time will be local moment. This is my feeling.
Okay.
But how we come on that level, that I cannot say. But our mission will be successful when you are preaching local environment, that must be local person GBC, local person spiritual master, local area, everything local. That time moment will be successful. But how to reach, I'm not such powerful to explain you. You have so many advanced devotees, they can come and create this atmosphere. But this is correct. I agreed. Everywhere, either Mauritius or India, either Kenya, either America, locals must be leader, must be spiritual master. Then our ISKCON will be localized. So that I want also myself, but I cannot do myself. But somebody doing, I will help them.
Definitely. Thank you, Umapati Prabhu. And that's the beauty of community, because we then come together and congregate, and collectively we work towards and how we can support such a vision that you have outlined here. And I was thinking BBT Africa, maybe this is also an invitation, conferences more, lekgotlas more regularly, because now we'll have the next annual conference, but here are opportunities for many conferences where we can now dissect and see how we can move forward in shaping and driving and supporting these visions which are shared. Thank you, Navina Radhika Prabhu and Umapati Prabhu, for your reflections on that question. Haridev Prabhu, I will pitch the next question starting with you, and Umapati and Navina Radhika Prabhu, you're also welcome to share. So we have a question from Abhishek, and he asks, is there a place for circular cultural traditions in Vaishnava philosophy? And Haridev Prabhu, you had mentioned in terms of the mix culturally, demographically that Mauritius has. Yes, there is a predominance in some ways, but there is representation of other cultures, of other communities as well, culturally. So is there a place for circular cultural traditions in Vaishnava philosophy? Your reflections on that?
Well, I would maybe refer to something which Srila Prabhupada mentioned in a little book called, I think it was the Hare Krishna Explosion, or I forgot the title of the book. And the same thing was asked to Srila Prabhupada about, secularism, secular culture. And Prabhupada mentioned that, the state need not or enforce a particular sort of religion on people, but the duty of the government is to see to it that the people who declare themselves to be practicing a particular religion are actually living according to to what is there in their books. That becomes the duty of the government. And doing that, it would help people to actually live up to what they say they are, like, whether you're Hindu, Muslims. So in that sense, even in our Vaishnav culture, we do not deny coexistence with other cultures, and in that sense, yes, we are open to a society where there are even if somebody says that he doesn't believe in anything, we have to respect that his thought, and create space for such individuals also. I don't know if this answers the question.
Yes, it's a start and a particular view on it. Because what I'm hearing from your answer is that in terms of mandating and creating a conducive environment, essentially, for all these different traditions to coexist, there's an administrative, government, legislative, whatever elements it might be, which enables such an environment that can allow each of us to thrive in the different ways that we connect with the Lord. Within our own tradition, I think that's the sense I'm getting from Abhishek's question. What is the place for those different traditions within the Vaishnava philosophy? That is what I'm understanding Abhishek to be asking. Umapati, Navina Radhika Prabhu, your thoughts in terms of question 2?
I'm circling around the word secular, but in my understanding, yes, in our philosophy, everything is covered. All ritualistic processes, all philosophies are covered under the process of bhakti. So, any philosophy, any culture, any tradition has an intended outcome. And it is part of our philosophy. It is included. In fact, ours is all-inclusive if it is followed properly. And I'm thinking particularly about African tradition and African culture. There is a resurgence at the moment of young people going back to ancestral traditions in the effort to bridge the gap between spirituality today and identity. And I'm even finding many devotees struggling to reconcile how do I continue with my family tradition versus how do I continue to be a Vaishnav? And there is no conflict. In fact, in Bhagavad Gita, first chapter, Krishna addresses this. So I think that the message is to really delve deep into the philosophy. Whatever your affinity is, to really absorb yourself in the philosophy and understand what Prabhupada is saying, and not think there is a distinction. Actually understand how high this philosophy is and how inclusive it is. Stop there.
Hare Krishna Mataji.
Yes, Umapati Prabhu, maybe in a minute or so, because now we need to wrap up. So you can share your parting shots on this, maybe in a minute or less if you can.
Yeah, my understanding, present time, especially I'm saying, I don't know throughout the world, especially wherever I'm preaching, youngsters, they don't want to follow their culture. And they want to, all the time they come in a city, they study in university, they don't want to follow their culture. They want to live new style. And just like our culture, Prabhupada's preaching, Vaishnava culture, embrace everybody. And they will be satisfied, everybody. So everybody can get chance very easily because people are not attached. Present time youngsters are not attached to their own culture. Before, here in Kenya, only one tribe must marry same tribe. Now we can show so many people marrying from this tribe to this tribe. I am seeing even Indian are marrying to Africans, African are marrying to Indians. So, but everybody can fit in our society. So it will be beneficial for everybody.
I'm so happy. We're at the end of our session, and I've been so like you should just see the hairs on my body. I'm just like really I've been enlivened by this conversation, and I'm really sad personally that it has to end, because as I've mentioned, there's so many insightful points, rich points, pertinent points that we each need to engage in, just to see how we can then foster the activities that move forward. Unfortunately, my sadness, we have reached the end of our session today. I'd love to thank you all deeply, richly, for sharing your thoughts, for sharing your hearts, for sharing your minds on the different topics that we've covered today. I'm sure I speak for our audience members in terms of, I'm sure we've all taken something home with us. And the question then becomes in terms of how do we then engage and support the prophecy that Lord Chaitanya is given in every town and village, certainly in every town and village, certainly in every town and village. And Srila Prabhupada, I love that phrase. I showed it on one of the slides, but he essentially came to teach us what we have forgotten. So as Navina Radhika, what you were sharing is that, it is this topmost philosophy which can reflect, all the other, and I agree in terms of the secular and how we describe the other aspects, but we can all engage and connect in terms of wherever we are, and just understanding our divine relationship, our divine identity, our divine relationship with the divine source, and how to live in love with him and his parts and parcels, or their parts and parcels. So I've really been enlivened by this conversation. Thank you all so much. Haridev Prabhu, Umapati Prabhu, Navina Radhika Prabhu. And thank you all for joining us for session 2. Don't go away. We're going on a break, but please come back. I think the break will be 15 minutes, but in our next session, we'll be discussing what is wrong with French. Can someone please remind me what the right title is? But essentially, we'll be chatting about French on this continent and how we can engage with that from the preaching side, from the missionary side. What is the difficulty with French books? Thank you very much. That is the correct title. So please grab a sip of water, come back, and we really look forward to you joining us after 15 minutes. Hare Krishna and Jai Srila Prabhupada.
Jai Shri Prabhupada. Thank you.